Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to a special interactive edition of Washington Unplugged. Bob Schieffer here, and today we're going to take your questions about the upcoming midterm elections. We'll also preview our special Election Day coverage, which is now 1 week from today. So here's the deal. You send us questions today on Facebook, on Twitter, on Ustream, live stream, also a live chat on cbsnews.com, or you can email us at washingtonunplugged@cbsnews.com. Joining me here at the desk today, CBS News senior political producer Rob Hendin, congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes, and CBS News political analyst John Dickerson, who will be monitoring and reading your questions and your comments. We're going to start with a question from Twitter at Paul Bogo, who asked, many Tea Party candidates won primaries without GOP support. To what extent has the GOP embraced these candidates? So, Rob Hendin, why don't we just start with you?
Well, Bob, there was a big stink in the primaries. About 7 candidates who were supported by the national Republicans lost to Tea Party upstarts. And at first they kind of stepped out of it a little bit, but now looking at support, looking at where they needed to win the Senate, the national Republicans have gotten behind almost all of these candidates. They're running ads. The only real exception may be Christine O'Donnell, because it was quite late and they realized it wasn't worth spending money in an expensive Philadelphia market for her in Delaware. But for the most part, the Republicans have really gotten behind these candidates. Rand Paul, Sharon Angle, Ken Buck, they're really getting a lot of support.
Yeah, especially in Kentucky, the Rand Paul, because Mitch McConnell campaigned against Rand Paul in that primary, but when Rand Paul won, he came around. Let's go to Facebook for a question now from Matt in D.C., and he says, if the Republicans take the House, will Pelosi retain a leadership position, or will the Democrats seek a less liberal minority leader? If so, who? Nancy.
Well, Bob, it's an open question right now. A lot of folks that we talk to say they assume that if the Republicans win, especially by a large margin, that Democrats will be feeling like it's time for new leadership on their side, possibly someone less liberal, as the person who wrote in mentioned. Perhaps Steny Hoyer from Maryland might take that top spot. Nancy Pelosi would sort of fade into the background a little bit, pursue a more orderly transition, and then perhaps retire after 2 years.
That would be my guess. I think if Democrats don't take the House, my guess is that Nancy Pelosi will retire. And just a guess, clearly underlined. John Dickerson's going to be getting most of the questions here. He's got his computer out and ready. You got another question for us?
Tim from D.C. asks, what definable mistakes did Obama make since inauguration? How much of the results on Election Day will be attributable to political cycles? Don't presidential parties usually lose a lot of seats? Well, yes, they do, of course. As we know, historically, the president's party loses in that first midterm, and also the Democrats have had such a great run in 06 and in 04, picking up seats they really shouldn't have, 06 and 08, pardon me, seats they really were in Republican districts. So the chips were stacked against them. And, of course, the economy is really giving Democrats a tough time. The problem for the president, though, is that he hasn't been able to communicate to Democrats in a way that gets them to feel enthusiastic. You've got to at least be able to do that. There's a little bit of evidence that's working now, but we'll see on Election Day if, in fact, he's been able to do that.
What do you think, Nancy? I mean, clearly the biggest mistake, John underlined, he came to office with a really bad economy.
Well, and I think Democrats in Congress will tell you now that even if they were supporters of health care reform, that they wish they had waited to tackle it, that what Americans were really clamoring for clearly was the economy and jobs to be tackled head on, and that healthcare really wasn't a big priority for a lot of people, and that there's a lot of frustration that it took a year to basically deal with healthcare reform to the exclusion of a lot of other things.
Rob, you're the White House producer for CBS News, so you talk to these White House people all the time. Have you found any of them who will admit to you privately that maybe it was a mistake to put so much on the health care fight rather than confining it solely to getting jobs and getting the economy back
Not in so
going?
many words, but there's a great article recently written about the pitfalls of the first 2 years of the administration, and most of them said they've had plenty of meetings saying it was a messaging problem but not a policy problem. And what I think they realized is that they tried to do the right thing. They were having trouble, as John said, selling it. And the group of voters who really got lost in everything in the healthcare battle were the independent voters. They really went to them in 2008, put Obama in office, and they didn't like the fact that there was so much emphasis on healthcare, that the fight for healthcare was so bitter. And this is a president who came in saying he was going to change Washington, and he really didn't do that. And I think people are really kind of left saying, well, maybe there's someone else for change.
You know, what about that, John? I mean, did the president raise expectations too high? I mean, he campaigned on hope. Yes, you can. Yes, I can. Yes, we can. But they never kind of finished the sentence. Yes, we can do what?
Well, that's right. And everybody filled in that sentence with everything they wanted. You can fix the economy, health care, you can, trim the shrubs outside my house. Everything was going to be fixed by the president. And I remember doing interviews about a year ago at the White House, and they were planning what they were going to do next. And the assumption was that the effort they had made to fix the economy was going to pay off. They misunderstood the size of this economic problem we were in. So they thought, well, we've spent 4 months talking about the economy, that we've locked that in. It's going to be great. A year from now, the economy is going to be back. Our Democrats are going to get the benefit from that, so we can move on to the health care. So they just misread the economy.
Let me ask you this, Nancy. Is some of this, though, just this fast food, instant answers, instant satisfaction, gratification society that we now live in? I mean, people wanted change, so they voted for the guy who said he was going to change things, and then in 15 minutes he hadn't changed things, so they said, uh-oh, we need somebody else. I mean, it's like my grandkids. I asked them the other day about Taylor Swift, and they said, oh, she's getting old. I mean, the time moves so quickly now.
And Justin Bieber is over the hill.
Yeah.
I think that people are hurting right now, and they're frustrated and they're angry, and they feel like everyone was bailed out besides them. And so they're looking at the Democrats and saying, well, you didn't make my lot better in 2 years, so, it couldn't be worse. Let's try the Republicans.
Next question,
We've got a question
John.
here from Dick Rathbone on CBSNews.com, and he asks, I'll throw this to you, Nancy, is the GOP going to take the Senate on Tuesday?
That would be a really tough climb. They would basically have to have a flawless night on election night, hold on to all of their seats, capture almost all the Democratic seats that are in play. It's possible, but as we've seen some of these races tighten in the past few weeks in West Virginia, we've seen Boxer pull ahead in California by a little bit. Patty Murray seems to be holding her own with a narrow margin in Washington state. So Democrats really only have to hold on to a few of those seats. You can see the president campaigning for Patty Murray there in Washington state. It would really be tough, but they probably will pick up anywhere from 6 to 9 seats, and then you end up with a Senate that is almost evenly divided. And how do you get
Patty Murray and Barbara Boxer, those are going to be very late coming in. What would the Republicans have to do early in the evening if it comes down to whether Barbara Boxer and Patty Murray determine whether or not Republicans take the Senate?
They'd have to win in West Virginia, where currently the businessman John Racy is trailing the popular Governor Joe Manchin slightly. They'd have to win in Kentucky. It's a very tight race there between Jack Conway, the Democrat, and Rand Paul, the Republican. If Conway pulls off a victory there, then that's one Republican seat that they lose. So they have to win yet another Democratic seat. They'd have to maybe pull off an upset victory in Connecticut, but they're pretty far down there right now.
And there's another late return that's going to come in, and that is up in Alaska,
that is a race to
people
watch.
tell me that Lisa Murkowski may actually pull this off and win as a write-in candidate. The election will be held on Tuesday. We can't say, but she seems to be doing better than a lot of people thought she would.
Definitely, and there was a lot of polls show that she's neck and neck with Joe Miller, the Tea Party back candidate who beat her for the Republican nomination. There is a Democrat, Scott McAdams, who's actually he's about 10 points behind, but he's not out of the clear yet. There is a chance that he could possibly win, but no one's really been able to poll the ability to write in a candidate. Right. The last write-in candidate was Strom Thurmond in 1954, so modern politics isn't really used to having a write-in Senate candidate.
And it's a hard thing to do, John.
Right. I mean, it just at the beginning, it's a hard thing to spell her name. Murkowski's not Smith.
But will they, if they misspell the name, will it still count?
They're going to use a very liberal interpretation of, but, we remember liberal interpretation is then maybe going to get into the courts. And what, does MU count? I mean, it's going to get debated.
But I'll tell you, if the Democrat in Alaska is able to pull off an upset, it's a long shot, but if it happens, this will be the biggest upset of the night and the strongest proof that some of these Tea Party candidates really ended up hurting the Republican Party instead of helping it, because he'll end up splitting the Republican vote with Lisa Murkowski.
Another question.
We'll go to another question, which there have been a lot of people writing in about this video that's on CBSNews.com of a Rand Paul supporter last night at the debate stomping on a woman's head, a supporter from MoveOn.org. Rob?
Yeah, let
We
Rob,
see the video now.
what do you tell us
Here's
about
the
this?
video now. We have this woman is named Lauren Val. She was, as John said, she's a MoveOn.org volunteer who was dressed in a blonde wig with a Republican Corps sign trying to get close to Rand Paul, mocking him as a stooge of special interest is what she was saying. Here she's being interviewed afterwards. And you see what happened. She was...
I mean, he had his foot on her head.
He did, and she was apparently trying to get close to the candidate. He was nearby and attempted, I can't speak for what he was doing, we haven't talked to him, but he was trying to stop her apparently and tried to subdue her that way. And she apparently did get a concussion. She went to the hospital and still waiting to see if she's going to press charges.
Yeah, and what are the campaigns saying about
Both of them have said, there's no room for this in politics. We have to be civil. We have to have a clear and decent debate, and they both basically have disowned this kind of activity.
Another question?
Nikki emails us and said, what the heck is going on with healthcare? When will it be implemented, and what happens to healthcare reform after Election Day?
Nancy.
Well, that's part of the problem with the messaging, isn't it? Because some of the major tenets of health care reform have been implemented, but the White House doesn't seem to be able to get the message out to voters that some very popular things that they liked about this health care bill have actually already gone into effect, like making sure that people up to age 26 can stay on their parents' plans, that people can't be dropped because of pre-existing conditions. But some of the tougher parts of health care reform that are thought to bring down the costs don't get implemented for years, and that's why people don't really see any changes that they can really relate to and understand why it took so long.
John, do you think that there's any chance, let's say the Republicans do take the House, like a lot of people think they're going to, do you think there's any chance that they could actually repeal health care?
Well, it's awfully hard to do, of course, because you have the president who could still veto any big effort to do that. They can try and defund parts of it. They can do sort of nibble around the edges. The problem they'll have is the country's screaming for an answer to the economic problem. So if we get into a big debate about repealing, taking this back, a lot of people may not like health care, but they don't necessarily want it completely repealed. They spend a lot of time eating up a lot of time on health care. They're going to basically essentially do what Obama did, which is spend so much time talking about health care and not addressing the thing people put them in office to talk about, which is jobs and the economy.
All right, another question.
Well, let's see here. We have... what about the reports of fraud in Troy, New York, and Nevada?
Well,
Pass.
this is going to be, I think, one of the things that we've talked about, we already talked about Alaska and the counting. One of the things that's we're really going to watch out for is there's going to be some very close elections. There's so many seats in play, some of the closest races that we've seen in many, many years. And there are going to be a lot of allegations of fraud. There's going to be vote watching. There's going to be lawyers on every side at all the polls making sure everyone who's registered to vote can vote. And that's another thing we've learned. It's now I hate to remind you that 10 years ago was the 2000 election, and we all know what happened in Florida, and I think that's going to play out in a lot of these districts, and there's going to be a lot of allegations. Early voting doesn't help that because ballots can still be challenged. Some of these races may be decided, as John said, in the courts in many, many weeks.
I think we're going to see a lot of lawyers in public
very much
places this time around. I really do. Nancy, what is the mood amongst Democrats up on the Hill right now?
Well, they're pretty depressed, Bob. They, they know that it's going to be a bad year for them. They don't know how bad, but they know that it's going to be more difficult for them to get their agenda passed. There are some recriminations between the House and the Senate. People in the House who say that they were forced to take votes that kind of put them in harm's way, like on the energy bill, and then it died in the Senate, so their vote was really for nothing. And now they're in trouble in their home districts, so they're very
Rob,
worried.
let me ask you, what is the White House? Are they going to kind of recalibrate things after this election? Is the president going to take a different approach? Is he going to pick out some things where he's going to try to find some areas where there can be agreement, or do they think they're going to just face the same Republican opposition that they had before?
I think the White House is going to go back on their strategy and try to find some areas of agreement. I think you're totally right on that. One of the big things coming up is going to be the debt commission that the president has put forward. That's going to come out at the beginning of December. We'll talk about the long-term debt. We also have the extension of the Bush tax cuts debate that's going to be coming up. So a lot of issues they're going to look for middle ground on. But I think the White House is, if you look at an interview that Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said the other day, that his big goal is to prevent Barack Obama from having a second term. When the White House wants to reach out the olive branch, that's the kind of thing they're hearing back. So it may be a lot of talk, again, that this would be a nice post-partisan president. We'd reach across the aisle, but when in the end, when push comes to shove, there may be some more partisan
What do
bickering.
you think, John? Do you see any coming together here after the election?
There is a tiny chance that both parties will recognize that the country dislikes both of them. I mean, one thing that's consistent in these polls is that people don't like Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah.
They may dislike Democrats a little more because they're in power now, but recognizing their common interest in the fact everybody's angry at them, there might be a decision, hey, maybe we should actually try and accomplish something here. And there's a slim chance that both recognizing it's in their self-interest, they might go ahead. But as Rob says, there's a lot of mistrust to get over before they can even do those tiny little things they might agree on.
Another question.
We have here from Atlanta, a question from Glenn in Atlanta. He says, the voting population in both parties seems to be largely ill-informed on candidates, issues, and voting histories. Do you have any suggestions to voters how they can get caught up on voting patterns, issues, etc. in the next 7 days?
Well, John, why don't you give us an answer?
Well, of
They
course,
can watch
check
CBS.
watch CBS News and check into cbsnews.com. I think also there are a lot of good sites that have the voting patterns in maps. There's something called Dave Leap's Atlas, which has all the voting patterns going back, it feels like, to the beginning of the Republic. And also the local papers do, the candidates and their issues, one next to the other in the run-up to Election Day.
Well, and I would say also, do not try to glean any information from the ads that are running, because they are so outlandish at this point and so misleading and taking the candidates out of context that you really can't learn anything about them that you can be sure is true. Go to their websites. Often their websites are far more detailed and accurate than their ads are. And do some research, do some homework.
As hesitant as I am to quote myself, I once observed that if all we knew about American politics and our elections is the information we got off television commercials, we'd think that everyone who ran for office was either a thug, a thief, or some sort of sexual deviant, that no normal person is involved in any race,
Right.
because that's really all we hear about in the commercials.
It's outrageous. I saw an ad today against Senator Barbara Boxer where the imagery appeared to blame her for the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. I mean, it's the final week and the gloves are off, and
My favorite
it's
of the
bad.
last of the 2008 race was the candidate who was accused of public urination, but
I missed that
we'll
one.
move on for that.
There's not a lot of that in the Twitter questions, but our
Well, we have denied that we were a witch. In
That's right.
One race this year.
Question comes in, will Obama really miss Pelosi if voters give the Republicans a majority on Election Day?
What do you think about that, Nancy?
I think he will miss Pelosi because as much as she's being demonized by the right right now, she was a very reliable partner for him. When he needed the votes, she went out and she got the votes, and she was very strategic about it. She knew which members she needed to push a little bit. She knew when to pull back, and most of the time she was actually far more reliable in getting him the votes that he needed in the House than Senator Harry Reid was in the Senate.
I think that's, in fact, I think that's exactly right. How about another one, John?
We've got Sarah on Facebook asks, another attack this year is on the candidate's manhood, and she asks about that. What do you make of women candidates like Sharon Angle, on the one hand challenging their male opponents to man up, while others like Linda McMahon and Meg Whitman are softening their image with personal stories in the closing days of the campaign?
I'll put this on the table. Who wants to step up and
Well, I
answer
think
that?
one of the things that we've seen the man up line from Robin Carnahan against Roy
What
Blunt
does that
in Missouri.
mean? Where does that come from?
I honestly, I cannot explain where it comes from, but I do know that it's something that has been said a lot in this campaign. It's kind of the one-liner. It was the one thing that
I think
Angle
it's
said
a
that
beer commercial, maybe.
it may have been. Maybe
Put on your man pants is something that a couple of candidates have said too.
Cowboy Up is another version of it.
Cowboy up.
Cowboy Up.
But it was a one-liner that got her Sharon Angle a lot of attention. And it's interesting, even in the primaries, Ken Buck, who's the Republican nominee in Colorado, was running against a woman named Jane Norton, and he said, "You should elect me because I don't wear high heels." So it was the kind of opposite side. But it did seem to be working for Angle. She got a lot of attention, and she went to Harry Reid and kind of stuck her finger in his face.
It's a way to make men look wimpy, and there's no good response to it if you're the male candidate. What do you say? I do have my man pants on. Thank you very much. There's not a lot you can
can't
do.
be
And yet we see the other side of that, and I just heard Nicole Wallace making a point about this. She has this new Romana Clay out, and she's talking about it now. A lot of women candidates feel the need to run commercials in the closing days to make them look softer, more feminine. Is that right?
Well, Meg Whitman has put out this extraordinary ad at the end of the governor's race in California, where it looks like the kind of ad you run 7 months ago, where you're just introducing yourself. I'm a soft, nice person. Let me define myself as that before my opponent beats the dickens out of me. Well, now she's doing this at the very end. So that's right. She's trying to come across.
So
as
the
soft and
guys have
cuddly.
got to muscle up, and the ladies have got to look softer. Right? And
Well, that's because some of these female candidates, it turns out that they were doing particularly poorly among women. Take a look at Linda McMahon in Connecticut, for example. Polls showed that she was trailing Blumenthal 2-1 amongst women. So she really needed to soften her image. Part of the problem she was having is that she was attacking him too much, and women didn't like that.
Isn't that something? Well, John, man up and give us a question.
I'll see if I can swing it. Another Sarah, not related to the Sarah we just had, emails us, how much impact has the rhetoric against Islam and Muslims in general and around Park 51 specifically, how much impact has that had on the elections?
I think it's had an impact. I mean, I think it has been, for better or for worse, I think it has had an impact. And I think it is part of the conversation this time around. Juan Williams would certainly agree with that, I would say.
That's
another
exactly right. Another topic that's trending on Twitter right now is about bullying. And our viewers on Twitter want to know if the new guidance on tackling bullying will affect the elections at all. And is this at all an important issue?
Well, it definitely is an important issue that a lot of people are talking about, and the new guidance is coming out of the Department of Education today, and it shows that one of the things the Obama administration has to do, even though they're not on the ballot, is try to campaign for all the Democrats, but still do public policy. And this isn't something that I don't believe that there are going to be a lot of attack ads in the last week saying the Republicans are pro-bullying, but it is something that the government just has to do, and they're doing it.
It's funny, remember school uniforms, Clinton returning to the middle after his big defeat in 95, the echoes of that with the administration talking about bullying. Okay, JHF5 on CBSNews.com asks, is it possible that Republicans won't win and take over the House?
I think the odds are very much against that. I mean, I think the wind is certainly blowing the Republican way. They may not win by as many seats as they thought they were going to, say, a month ago. But I think when you look at the numbers, and Nancy, you did a piece last night on the Evening News, where what do we have, some 70 seats that are in play now, and about half of those look like they're going leaning toward the Republicans, something like that.
There are 77 Democratic seats that are at risk of changing hands compared to just 8 Republican seats that are at risk. Of those 77, 35 of them, just about half, are already leaning Republican. So the chances are the Republicans are going to pick up those 35. Then they only need to pick up 4 more among the remaining seats that are toss-ups or edging Democrat in order to reach that magical number of 39 that it takes to win back the House. So will they do it? It looks very likely. Will they do it by large margins? Who knows? It could be a good night for them or a great night for them, but either way, it looks quite likely at this point they'll take back the House.
Is that your take also,
totally
Rob?
agree. I mean, everyone's basically agreed that this is going to be a wave election, meaning that there will be at least probably 40 seats at least that turn over. And the difference between a wave and a tsunami is that maybe 20 additional seats, where if 20 more of those seats break towards the Republicans and they pick up something in the high 50s or 60s, that would be an impressive tsunami election. But Nancy's right on. There's enough seats in play. There's so many Democrats at risk that the chances of the Republicans winning the House are pretty good.
And what about you, John? Where do you come down?
I think that's right. I think it's, what'll be interesting to me is to see what kind of wave do we have? Do we have just Republican districts kind of reverting to form where they were before? Or does this wave take in a lot of these Senate candidates too and tell us something more about the middle as opposed to just, kind of the conservatives being super energized in this election? So how does the wave affect the House, and then how will it affect the Senate?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because a lot of those toss-up seats are suburban seats. So this is really all going to come down to how Republicans do with suburban voters who had been trending Democratic in 06 and 08. How well they capture those suburban voters is the key to how well they do in this.
And John, let me ask you this, because so many of the voters in the suburbs are independents. They all went for Barack Obama in 2008. Somehow they seem to be going a different way this time. What do you think happened?
I think what happened is that, as you mentioned earlier, they invested a lot of hopes in Barack Obama, and maybe outsized hopes, and he certainly played on those hopes. And then they were disappointed on sort of the just, not only did he answer the question, sort of take charge of the economy in the way they had hoped he would, but also this feeling that one minute it was the economy, one minute it was healthcare, one minute it was the car companies and TARP, and he was doing too much, too fast, too far. And a lot of what you hear is, and Republicans have been playing on this, is just let's put on the brakes. It doesn't necessarily mean they are in love with Republicans, but they want some kind of break on what they've seen as being just a too much, too fast. Part of it, a little bit of it is too much, too fast, too liberal, but just too much, too fast from the White House.
All right, another question here. We're
Bianca.
coming to the end of the line here.
Bianca in Savannah asks, yes, back to President Obama, has any of the campaigning in the last few weeks made any kind of impact on Democratic chances in the election, or is it too little?
I don't know what to think about that. What do you guys think? You've been out there.
I think there was a lot of enthusiasm in Washington State for Patty Murray. He had 38,000 people in Los Angeles with Barbara Boxer and Jerry Brown ran for governor. There was a lot of enthusiasm. He went out there. His goal was to rally the base, to get Democrats to go to the polls in Washington where they're doing early voting. He said, mail it in your ballot. You already have it on the kitchen table, just mail it in. And I think there is some of the polls are showing they're trending a little bit. Boxer's up a couple points now, and I think he was able to get out. People were paying attention to him, and he did what he had to do.
What do you think?
Well, I think it did two things. Number one, it reminded people of some of that magic that he had in 2008 where he was able to bring out these enormous crowds. And it reminds people, hey, he's still the same guy that you voted for in 2008. Why don't you give Democrats a chance to enact more of his agenda? And the other thing is that when he's going to all these places, he's not just holding these big rallies, he's holding fundraisers. And a lot of these Democrats this year are trailing Republicans by enormous margins, not so much the candidates themselves, but these outside groups where you see Republican outside groups just vastly outspending Democrats. Any money that he can raise for Democrats is really going to help them this year.
And I tend to agree with everything they said, but I also know that in the end, races always close. Mm-hmm. They just always seem to close. So I'm not sure it's totally because the president's been out there campaigning. It may be just the old thing that you get into the final weeks or something, these races begin to close.
I think that's right, although a part of it too is you got to put his body somewhere. Imagine if he were just staying in Washington. I mean, and there are some places obviously that he can't go. He had a little trouble in Rhode Island with the Democratic candidate there who told him to shove it, I think the expression was. So
I expect that helped that candidate too.
That's right.
I mean, people do kind of like that every once in a while.
That's right.
A couple of questions to go.
All right, our here we go. Looking ahead to 2012, will the Tea Party still be around if Republicans win Congress?
Nancy?
I think the Tea Party definitely will be around, but I think it's really an open question exactly what role it's going to play in governing and in our electorate. I think what this election has showed is that there really are some flashpoints between Republicans and the Tea Party where they don't always believe the same things. Some areas where the Tea Party helps, some areas where it doesn't. So I think it's really going to come down to how Republicans and the Tea Party can figure out how they work together and whether they work together. And also it depends on, when some of these Tea Party candidates get elected, how they behave in office. Nobody really knows what a Senate with a few Tea Party candidates is going to look like.
Well, I think that's right. It's the problem President Obama ran into with his hardcore liberal base is, they think he capitulated. They don't like half a loaf, or they think he's only, gotten a quarter of a loaf. And so do the Tea Party candidates say, or the Tea Party supporters say, if John Boehner's the Speaker of the House, you're giving in to try and get a deal. You're not doing what we sent you there to do. And then it's a problem they have to handle in the same way the president's handling his disaffected base this time around.
Last question.
Last question is from our friend Kiki Ryan from Politico.
Uh-oh.
And she says, this is the closest Halloween could possibly be to Election Day. And will this have any effect on the election itself?
I think they should just go ahead and have the election on Halloween, is what I think, because I mean this is an election that has so many weird things connected to it that maybe Halloween would be more appropriate than waiting until the Tuesday after Halloween.
Well, I think you may see a couple of people saying they're not Christine O'Donnell on Halloween.
You see a record number of witches this
A
year.
lot of witches, and it'll be interesting.
You know, my favorite part of the Christine O'Donnell story is, though, when asked what she was going to be for Halloween, she said she was going to be Dorothy. And I'm going to give her some points for that one.
That was a good call, yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys. It's really a lot of fun, as it always is when you're talking politics. We may be 100% right, we may be totally wrong about all of this, but the voters will decide on Election Day who gets elected and who doesn't, and we won't know until then. So that's it for today's Interactive Washington Unplugged. You can join us here every day at 12:30 on CBSNews.com, and be sure to tune in to our special Election Day edition of Washington Unplugged at 9 p.m. next Tuesday. Stay tuned now for a live chat with 60 Minutes correspondent Lara Logan. She'll be talking about a profile she did on Jane Goodall. I'm Bob Schieffer. Thanks for joining us.